rise above, extinguish fear, rise above, extinguish.
Okay, guys, welcome back to Rise Above. As we know, two cameras are better than one, so let's do it. Right, this is a recorded video in case you're watching this on a premiere. COVID-1984 Part 10. Where is the pandemic? Now, the reason I'm doing this is at the moment, the COVID Union are pushing hard with their miracle cure. They're trying to emotionally blackmail the whole country into taking it to get their normal lives back. And in the last couple of days online, it's been a real battlefield out there. And the biggest casualty has been the truth. A lot of really overly obedient citizens have been like regurgitating what I would say is COVID propaganda, straight up misinformation about how bad the pandemic is, how high above the 5-year average of deaths, etc., etc. So, you know, some of us are questioning if the pandemic even exists, if the flu has just been rebranded, if the extra deaths were actually caused by a lockdown, or if the entire thing is actually just a fabrication. So now we're in December. We've got a lot more data to analyse, all from the Office of National Statistics, all for the first half of the year. So we're mainly going to be talking about what happened in the first wave of COVID-1984, the first lockdown, the first part of the pandemic. Right, so as always, we like to do a screen grab, and we will head over to my pre-prepared slideshow, okay? Right, so this is graph one. Now, this starts in January this year and goes up to August the 31st. It shows flu, pneumonia and COVID deaths. This graph shows 394 deaths to flu, 13,000 deaths to pneumonia, and 48,000 COVID-19 deaths. Now, the first thing to notice there is that is a very, very low amount of flu deaths. Okay, so you know, the first thing to notice is that's fantastic. Flu, like everyone has been saying, has basically been eradicated. Now, we know that this 48,000 is a very high number, and we also know that the classification of it is very loose. We know you only need to have a positive coronavirus test within 28 days of dying for any reason. We already know you've got to check the small print with the COVID Union. So I thought maybe, before we move on to the next graph, I should check the small print of exactly how they've classified these 48,000 deaths to see if there's any extra little caveats to catch us out. Notes, point 4. The International Classification of Diseases, 10th edition, ICD-10, definitions are as follows. Coronavirus, COVID-19, U07.1 and U07.2. There are two different ways of classifying it. That's interesting. I wonder if they've widened the goalposts once again. Let's have a quick look. So we go over to the Wuhan Hoax Organization, and this is their ICD-10 document. The first bullet point, an emergency ICD-10 code, 07.1, COVID-19, virus identified, a diagnosis of COVID-19 confirmed by a laboratory test. And we know how inaccurate those laboratory tests are. Here's the interesting part. Look at this. U07.2. Virus not identified is assigned to a clinical or epidemiological diagnosis of COVID-19 where laboratory confirmation is inconclusive or not available. So that means they haven't had a test at all. So who would have thought it? Not only can you go into this huge number of 48,000 by dying within 28 days of a positive test, you can actually go into there without a positive test as well. As it says here, both 7.1 and 7.2 may be used for mortality coding as the cause of death. There it is in black and white. You don't even need a positive PCR test to be classed as a COVID-19 death. Who knew that? This is why we always read the small print. Okay, here is the next graph, again, from the Office of National Statistics. Flu and pneumonia deaths, which are basically, as we've just seen, just pneumonia this year. Flu has been pretty much eradicated. This is the 5-year average for each month, January through to August. As you can see, high in January, going lower through to August when flu and pneumonia die off in the summer. Look what happens when we add the figures from 2020. The green bar, as you can see, is consistently every single month lower. And as we go further, it's getting lower and lower, where it goes to about half of the 5-year average of flu and pneumonia. Now, look what happens when we add COVID-19. You can see a huge spike in April and a bit of a spike carrying on in May, way above flu and pneumonia. But as we go through to July and August, COVID-19 goes below flu and pneumonia. So it really looks like most of the people that died out of this 48,000 basically died only in the months of April and May. Now look at April, just under 30,000 deaths from COVID-19. 30,000 deaths. Where have we heard that number before? Next slide. The BBC. Coronavirus, almost 30,000 excess deaths in care homes. And this comes from the Office of National Statistics. Could that be the 30,000 deaths out of this 48,000 of this hugely loose classification where you don't even need a positive test? I thought I did all this in episode 1 and 2 of COVID-1984. Lo and behold, I would find even more absolute manipulation of figures in episode 10. Okay, so here we see the percentage of deaths in different settings: hospitals, care homes, private homes, elsewhere, and other. Blue is pneumonia and flu. Green is the 5-year average, and COVID-19 is the dark blue one. What sticks out there? A massive spike in care homes, where twice as many people died of COVID-19 than flu and pneumonia this year, or the 5-year average. And in hospital, less people. So it really seems that this massive spike of about 30, 40,000 deaths basically occurred in 1 or 2 months back in April and May in care homes. Now, let's put this into perspective, because we're talking about flu, pneumonia, average deaths. Let's go back to a historical graph. This starts in 1901, and the flat line here represents the 48,000 people that had died up to August 31st of COVID-19. Now, that looks like a lot. But look what happens when we add the historical flu and pneumonia figures going all the way back to 1901. This is when it gets really interesting. Watch this. Boom. Right, so starting at modern day, COVID-19 is higher than the average 5-year of flu and pneumonia deaths. When we go back to the year 2000, near 1999, for the whole of the 90s, this wavy line of flu and pneumonia is way above the COVID-19 deaths. This already doesn't look like a pandemic, does it? Let's go back a little bit further to 1978, 79. This is what a real pandemic or a smaller pandemic looks like. This is Hong Kong flu, where 2 to 4 million people worldwide died. Nothing was shut down. Nobody wore a mask. That's when Woodstock happened. Hundreds of thousands of people got together in very close proximity and did very sociable undistancing, yeah? So this massive dip here, that's around World War II. Well, a lot of people were out dying elsewhere then, I guess. This big spike here, that's the Great Depression. That's 1929. And this big spike here, that is Spanish flu. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what an actual pandemic looks like. Here is the big question. How many actual people in total have died this year over the 5-year average? Now, to work this out, this is what I had to do. I went once again to the Office of National Statistics. I got the weekly deaths for every year going back to 2010. And they look like this. The actual deaths and the 5-year average. So once all of these are added up for the last 5 years, they look something like this. 2016, 525,000. 2017, 533,000. 2018, 541,000. 2019, 530,000. And so far, up to week 47 in 2020, we had 511,000. Now, obviously, it's lower because there are still 5 weeks to go. So what I did was I went into the 5-year average for these weeks and I collated it. The next 5 weeks should present, using the national average, it would add an extra 50,000 deaths for the weeks from 48 to 52. That gives you a total projected deaths for 2020, projecting only the last 4 weeks, of 562,000. Okay, that's the total deaths. Now, the 4-year average based on these 4 years here is 532,000. So the actual difference, the actual hard number of extra deaths compared to the 5-year average we've had this year, we're back to the same old number, 30,000. Now, as we've seen here, these 30,000 excess deaths, it looks like they occurred in care homes, which is very sad, and we can argue all day about how that happened. I would say it's by malpractice and they were essentially euthanized. The fact is that 30,000 is 0.04% of the population of the UK, which is 66 million. Now, to put that into perspective, that is less than 1/2 of a tenth of 1% of the population. I will repeat, 0.04% of the population extra died this year compared to the 5-year average. And that is less than 0.1% of the population of the UK. Now, how these people actually died, we will never know, as the classification is so convoluted. It could have been seasonal flu. It could have been this new virus, if it exists. It could have been hospital malpractice or the effects of a lockdown. In the grand scheme of things, on a population-wide scale, it is merely a blip. Okay, so what is the final conclusion that we can draw from this? 30,000 extra people have died this year compared to the 5-year average. 0.04% of the population. Less than 0.1% of the population has died this year extra compared to the 5-year average. Can anybody point to this pandemic for me? If you can, please send me an email, send me a message if you can point to the pandemic. In the meantime, catch us on the Friday night live stream. Like, subscribe and share. And most of all, never ever forget to rise above.
No predictions or prophecies, just scriptures and mythologies. No instructions in the Odyssey. Inhale, exhale logically, part of the tribe. Earn my stripe, hung with the pack. Long dark night, poison darts, long blow pipes. I take aim at the moon shines bright. Entered this jungle as a student. I was acting humble and prudent, practicing to become fluent in a sacred tribal movement. Master arts the shamans using, elevating to more than a human. Raise the vibes so the hate's reducing. Absorb the light the sun's producing. Air's electric, feeling the charge of thunder. Dark foreboding sky we got under. Hectic in the presence of wonder. Open your eyes, awake from the slumber. Life is a prey, act like a hunter. Enter the battle, emerge from the bunker. It is the rain dance, I am the drummer. Dance in the rain, it's a stormy summer, look yonder.